to grow away my blues. I'm so tired of moaning. Trying to grow away my blues. I keep weeping and crying. Every time I think of you. I would rather die of starvation. Every shot in the desert sun. I would rather die of starvation. Every shot in the desert sun. And to think of some other man holding you in his arms.
Here.
Have the Citizen Review Board. I don't know who will be presenting from the legal department. If you're on the line.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Gina Grimes, City Attorney.
Yes, ma'am. Before you begin, how long do you think for your presentation?
We can finish our presentation in about 15 minutes.
Okay, my thoughts are that you do your presentation, and that after the presentation is completed, that council breaks for lunch. We come back, depending on the time, either 1 or 1:15, and we come back, with clear heads, and we continue the discussion there and move on. Is there any objection from council? Yes, sir?
I don't have an objection. I would just ask for one. I know folks have got to eat, etc. But just the sooner the better. I've got some issues coming up around 3. I don't think we'll run till 3, but you never know. But just
Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, depending on the number of questions, we may be able to wrap it all up and
All right. Well, let's play it by ear. But pending now, we'll look at breaking for lunch. But go ahead, ma'am, if you'd like to.
Yes, I'd like to have the PowerPoint
Yes,
brought up.
Councilman Carlson.
Gina, Ms. Grimes, if I could just for a second. There's a lot of misinformation out there about this, and I just want to set the record straight, and you can weigh in. This is not a new committee. It's been around since about 2016. The way it was created, without going into detail, was not satisfactory to the public. And so as we have been trying to make changes in the last year and a half or so, we have in particular looked at this. I think Councilman Goods brought this issue up. This discussion is, I think, the third discussion we've had on this. And it started with us having a discussion about changing it, and then the mayor came up with her proposal, The mayor then graciously agreed to listen to more input from the public and from us, and we edited again, and this is the third round where council and the mayor have both been listening to the public. There's not a mayor's proposal and a council proposal. It's also not a new committee, and if it was unconstitutional, it would have been challenged sometime in the last 5 years. So this is
That's all correct.
this is a conversation that the mayor and we have been having with the public. And in the last round, I think I was the one that delayed the last discussion, but ACLU, people in the community, and the PBA were both unhappy. But now today, they've stood up and said, for the most part, they are happy. There are some tweaks that we might make to it, but the purpose of delaying it and having these conversations is so that the mayor and city council could work together to get something that was better for the community. And again, it's just editing something that already exists. Thank you.
That's all correct. Can the PowerPoint be brought up?
Yes, please pull up the PowerPoint, and yes, ma'am, begin.
Next slide. First slide, please. Okay. As you can see, the last time that this agenda item, the CRB revisions, was discussed was back in November. And in November, we actually didn't have a full workshop. We did hear public comment, but it was continued to make some modifications. But the last substantive motion that you made was back in September. And in September, what you asked was that the comments from the PBA, the ACLU, Councilman Dingfelder, all be considered and for a new draft to be developed. And we did that, and we submitted it prior to the November 19th public hearing. On November 19th, in individual discussions with various council members, some additional revisions were requested by Councilman Goods and Councilman Dingfelder. And so those revisions were also made, and they are contained in the current draft that you're looking at right now. And so if you take a quick look at the red line that was included in your package of materials, you'll quickly see that all of these changes cumulatively amounts to a rewrite of the Citizen Review Board ordinance. We have made substantial changes. And also, we have made a lot of progress from the draft that was adopted back in 2015. Today, in listening to all the speakers, it's unfortunate that almost every single one of them focused on what's not in the ordinance as opposed to what is in the ordinance. And to your point, Councilman Carlson, we have been discussing the substance of these changes. This will be now the fourth public hearing. We've probably spent more than close to 30 hours in discussions, and that doesn't include any of the offline discussions that all of you had with us and with the ACLU and with the PBA, and that we all had with each other. And in my view, the city and everyone involved, including the PBA and the ACLU, should be congratulated for how far that we've moved the needle from the way this ordinance currently exists and as it was adopted in 2015. And so what you have in front of you today is a very balanced proposal. It's not biased towards law enforcement, and it's not biased against law enforcement. It's a vast improvement over the existing code, and the reason why is it substantially expands the powers of the CRB. There were a couple changes that were made that not one single speaker even mentioned, and they're going to have a significant impact. And one of those changes is a change that was championed by Councilman Goods, and that is with the hiring process at TPD. Chief Dugan, who's here this morning, presented the concept of creating an interview panel for the police department, and he agreed that he would be willing to allow one of the CRB members to rotate in and off that panel. And with that change, Councilman Goods also pressed for additional changes dealing with the diversity of the the hiring panel as well as the diversity of the department. So those are significant changes that were made, but yet, and will have a tremendous effect on the culture at the police department. And then there was another change that was made, and actually one that was suggested by the mayor, and that's a complaint tracking process. So that going forward, every complaint that comes into TPD can be monitored and tracked by the Citizen Review Board. In fact, they'll get monthly reports on the individual complaints. So two significant changes. Those two changes happen to be changes that not one other CRB in the entire state of Florida has in their ordinance. So we're very, very progressive as far as that is concerned, and as well as some of the other improvements that we made. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Assistant City Attorney Ursula Richardson, who has worked with us throughout this whole process, and she is going to go through those changes with you, and then I will wrap up by discussing implementation.
Good morning, Council.
Good morning, go ahead.
I just wanted to point out where we are currently in our ordinance. Right now, the Citizens Review Board looks at please go to the next slide. Yes, and so on the screen, you can see the PowerPoint that talks about what the existing duties of the CRB are, and then what we are proposing in the draft ordinance that is before you today. One of the things that you can clearly see is before, what we currently have is that they review closed TPD investigations that only deal with use of force. And in those reviews are our cases that where discipline was imposed and discipline was not imposed. That portion of the current ordinance is not changing in the proposed ordinance that we have. That section of the current ordinance can now be found at C5 and G5 in the draft proposal. But I wanted to highlight some of the changes and some of the ones that Ms. Grimes just mentioned. Number one, the proposed ordinance expands exponentially the type of cases that the CRB will review. Again, currently they only look at use of force cases, but under the current or the draft ordinance, they would be able to look at any number of cases, and that would include allegations of someone tampering with evidence, anyone who is accused of turning off the body-worn cameras, search and seizure issues, whether or not there's any sexual harassment, racial discrimination, falsifying time, welfare fraud, or even stealing evidence from the property room. Those are all the kinds of things that if an officer has been suspended, demoted, or terminated, those are the kind of cases that the CRB would be reviewing. As Ms. Grimes mentioned, the CRB would now have the opportunity to participate in the hiring process and learn more about that from the police department, but also gives the community an eye into or transparency about how that process works so that they can inform the community. The complaint tracking system is also something that's being proposed. And again, it gives that opportunity. I know that it's been said today that there's this issue of maybe things falling through the cracks or cases not being adequately investigated. But from the time that a complaint would come in, of course, with the confidential information redacted, the CRB will have a window, and CRB meaning the public will have a window into every complaint that comes into the city and to see how long it takes for those investigations to be finalized, and then also what the end result is of those particular investigations. And there is not another Citizens Review Board or Police Oversight Board in the state of Florida that has the opportunity to have that window into what the police department is doing. Also, as a part of these new changes, the CRB will be able to receive complaints directly from the citizens. Of course, in line with the Officers' Bill of Rights, we have put safeguards in place to make sure whatever confidential information will be protected, but it will still have the opportunity to do that as well. And also creating a CRB website simply so that there is the opportunity for the public to know about the CRB, have information in a way that basically brings the CRB to the forefront. Also, one of the changes that is not in the current ordinance is that if there is going to be any change to the use of force policies within the city of Tampa by the police department, the CRB would get notification of that information and not just be told that it's happening, but also an explanation to the CRB, which means an explanation to the public about why something in the use of force policies would be changing. Again, we focus on the use of force in this ordinance simply because when we looked at the CRB's community survey that they did in 2018, the use of force issues are one of the top 5 issues that the public was focused on or felt was important for the CRB to focus on. We've also built more community engagement into the current draft of the ordinance. And by doing that, the CRB would actually go into the community and meet at locations that will allow the public to be able to attend those meetings. But in addition to that, we built in a requirement that the CRB do a community survey every 2 years so that, again, the public is always giving information to the CRB so that the CRB knows how to focus their attention and their business to make sure they are carrying out the public's mission. We've built in, at the request of several people, the fact that the legal counsel for the CRB will no longer be the TPD legal advisor, and that will be a neutral assistant city attorney who is not affiliated with the police department, does not work with the police department, and so that person will have some semblance of neutrality. But on top of that, it has also been built into the ordinance that if a conflict, as the public has mentioned today, or at least the speakers and commenters have mentioned, if a conflict were to arise and the CRB perceived that there was a conflict, there is an opportunity for a private lawyer to be retained by the city attorney's office as per the charter to resolve whatever that conflict or issue is and give advice to the CRB. And the most important thing that I think is built in this current ordinance is live annual reports to the city council, which means live annual reports to the public about what has occurred with the Citizens Review Board over the course of a year. It'll be the opportunity for the public to learn what the CRB has accomplished in a year, what kind of recommendations have been made, what kind of changes have been implemented based on those recommendations, and best of all, it will be the opportunity to say whether or not the ordinance needs to be modified or tweaked in a way that it will meet the mission of what this board's intended purpose is. Ultimately, I'm glad that Councilman Carlson spoke up because I kept hearing people say it's the mayor's proposal, it's somebody else's proposal, but the fact is that we have spent many hours having conversations with a lot of stakeholders in this, including the council, including the mayor, including the police department, the PBA, the ACLU, the members of the current CRB themselves. All of those conversations have been taken into account to basically craft a product or an ordinance that is the best fit for the city of Tampa. And so the mission was not to make this something that will work for Minneapolis. The mission was not to make it something that will work for Miami, and it was not a mission to make it something that will work for Ferguson, but to work for what we have here in the city of Tampa. And as Ms. Grimes said, in doing that, we have, in fact, produced a product that we believe is balanced with all of those interests. And those are the highlights of the additional changes that we are proposing to the current CRB ordinance.
All right, thank you very much. Does that conclude, or do you have more?
One more slide.
Okay, go ahead.
Next slide, please. And so where we are now is, I'm sorry, one more slide, past that one.
Okay.
Where we are now is how do we move forward from here? Well, there's some next steps that I think are important to discuss with you. The revised CRB ordinance is going to take some time to implement, and we are proposing an effective date of approximately 6 months from now. We'll also have to develop a schedule for appointment of the additional members. to the CRB. Those will be council appointments. We have to schedule the community meetings, identify their locations. One of the most important things that has to be done is developing a training curriculum. For the first year, the CRB members will need to be educated as to the hiring process, the TPD's discipline process, and any new standard operating procedures that might be proposed, and how SOPs are drafted and developed and reviewed and monitored. Another change with the interview panel, that will have to be established, and then the CRB themselves will have to agree upon some sort of rotation system so that each of them gets to participate in the interview process. Another item that will take a substantial amount of time to implement is establishing the monthly complaint reporting and tracking system. That will have to be internal to the police department, and we'll have to work closely with them on establishing that reporting system. And then also there's the intake of the complaints filed directly with the CRB. We'll have to ensure that any complaints that are filed with them are immediately transferred to TPD so that they can work their way through that process. And the last item is creating the CRB website to make the CRB more transparent, more information about the CRB available to the general public, and publishing links in various different places so it's easy to find. So as you can see, this is a lot of responsibility and duties that we are placing on the CRB. Because of that, there's a lot of training that is going to be required. As you know, these are volunteers who work all day and come to meetings that start at 6 o'clock at night, and they have to go to work the next day. And like council members themselves know, when you have these late night meetings, it's very difficult, you know, to give each matter the attention that it deserves. So I think that it's important for council in considering these changes to consider the responsibilities they are placing on this lay board and the amount of work that they're expecting this lay board to do. I think what we've proposed so far is significant, and what we're suggesting is give us an opportunity to implement these changes. As Ms. Richardson mentioned, every year you will have basically an appointment with the CRB, because they are required by this ordinance to appear in person and present their annual report. So as we move forward, if you find that any additional changes above and beyond all those that we've already proposed, if you find any additional changes are necessary, you'll have a window of opportunity once a year to hear about any concerns and to make any necessary changes if appropriate. So I'd just like to close by saying that at this stage, given the breadth of the changes and the extent of the training that's going to be required, we are requesting and recommending that we move forward with this current draft, and that it be scheduled for first reading and discussing it with Mr. Shelby. And he thinks that the soonest it could be scheduled for first reading, if council is so inclined, would be March 18th. And so with that, we would like to ask for your support and to move forward with first reading on the 18th of March.
All right. Thank you very much. Did you have your hand up? Oh, Councilman Carlson, Councilman Goods, Councilman Vieira.
You want to do that now or wait?
Yeah, let's break now for lunch, come back at 1 o'clock, and then we'll take the questions and go from there. All right, we're in recess until 1.
Darling, really hope you feel the same. She said it's evil all the time. She must have been mistreated. She got that same thing on her mind. what I will do. I work hard for you, darling, and bring home all of my loot. Hard-hearted woman, she's dead as evil all the time. She must have been mistreated. She got that same thing on her mind.
Welcome back to Tampa City Council Workshop. Roll call, please.
Vieira. Here. Gould.
Here.
Dingfelder. Maniscalco.
Here.
Citro. Carlson.
Here.
Miranda. Have a physical quorum.
Thank you very much.
And
We
Madam
were
Clerk,
at the
did you get
discuss-
I'm sorry to interrupt, but did you get Council Dingfelder's presence?
Yeah, we got it. He's right here. I see him on the screen.
Okay, thank you.
And he was on the screen before we hit the gavel, so. All right, we'll go back to the discussion on the CRB. The presentation was completed by our legal department. Council members, I know you had questions.
I know,
Councilman
wasn't it Carlson?
Carlson Goods Vieira. Yes. Go ahead, Councilman Carlson. Councilman Goods.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, as the person who originally made this motion about reference to the CRB, been a lot of comments today reference to, in public comment for those who are for, those who are against. I look at some of the comments of how the police business is run, over police, the Constitution, and when I look at all those things, I look at my council members. And I would ask each and every one of them, do you trust what I can tell you, what I know from my experience and expertise as being a police officer?
I would say yes, 26 years of service, correct, sir? I mean, from your perspective?
I say yes, and we give you great deference.
Well, on that note, I can tell you how things truly are, and that way the public who there or for can understand that the police business is a very difficult business. I'm going to get a little time. I know Mr. Vieira, when he goes in his explanations of what he's championing or not championing, he gives a rendition. So I'm going to give a little rendition of the police department so people can understand. The police department is a paramilitary organization. Police officers follow orders. And whether they like the orders that have been handed down or not, they do a job, whether they like it or not. There have been several orders by several police chiefs and commanders that I didn't like, and I expressed my opinion I didn't like. Whether I was disciplined about, and my evaluation said that Councilman Goods likes the police department, enjoys what he does, but sometimes doesn't like policies that are implemented. But I have to follow those policies, regardless if I like them or not. When I look at the police department from the day I started, I loved it when I first started. But then I started to see a side sometimes that was not pleasant at times. When I hear Ms. Portman talks, she's a good friend, good heart. Jimmy, who's over there with her, good heart. And they're going to fight for the troops. That's what they're paid to do, as the union president, to fight for issues of the troops. But also look at the other troops who are black and brown, who sometimes feel that their issues go on deaf ears. I served as the communications director for the Association of Black Law Enforcement. We had that association because sometimes we felt that there are different biases at times. And there are still biases now in the police department. I get calls now. I told, Attorney Grimes about some of the concerns some officers called me about some things that are in the policies. We discussed those things. But I want people to know that there are a lot of good police officers, a lot, that understand, who might have been born or raised in marginal communities, who get it. But then there are other officers who don't understand, who've lived in affluent communities, who've never been around black and brown people, and they don't understand. They don't have a clue. Police department does have a lot of biases. I know, because I've been around it, seen it firsthand, up and close. And that's why I became a councilman. I always said if I ever had the opportunity to sit before the people, because now I represent the people. I have a job to do with dealing with issues with police department and other issues in departments, but I represent the people as a whole. And like I said, police officers follow orders. They do what they're told to do. Mr. Rivera, you remember when me and you were campaigning and we had a debate at a church. It got heated. Do you remember that, sir?
If I may, Councilman, I remember that well. That's one in Temple Terrace, and I remember that well. Let's just put it that way. I remember that.
So that brings me to this point when you talk about police. See, in black communities, property owners, good citizens that are African American, black and brown, they want the police. They want safety in their communities. They don't want the shootings that we've been having that are out of control. They don't want the hanging out on the street corners. They respect the police. But on the other hand, they feel sometimes that there are biases with the police when dealing with certain situations because it's cultured. A lot of officers don't understand the culture. And that's where the biases come in. Mr. Rivera, at that debate, it was talked about how a person was treated and the sons of a person was treated. And I said, what happens when you become a police officer and you come from different communities and you've never been in low-income communities, marginalized communities, different cultures of communities, you don't understand. And you talk about the way officers treat a person or a shooting and so forth. I talked about fear. Mr. Rivera, did I say that? Fear. See, fear is the catalyst of everything in a police department. When there's a shooting, I want to come home at night. That officer wants to come home at night. But when things happen, it's how you channel your fear. And a lot of times, if you've never worked in black communities, been around black people, brown people, there's a fear level sometimes. People don't want to believe that, but there is. Fear of the unknown. If you recall, we had the lady from USF that was here that was talking about issues and kept talking about outside in the communities. No, it don't start in the communities. See, it starts inside the house. The culture change has to change. So I can get all these policies that Ms. Grimes is trying to work and do and try to implement for my communities and from the ACLU and justice committees, all these things. But it doesn't mean a thing if you can't straighten out the house and make sure that the house understands culture and people and how to deal with certain communities and cultures. I always talk about that. Fear. When I get a guy riding my car for the first time in the SAR, I say, he's going to ride with you today, Gooch. No problem. We don't go to the fancy restaurants. We eat right there in that community right there because I'm not driving that place because I don't live over there. And young guys say, why can't we go over here to the nice restaurant? No, because we work here. We're not driving way over there. You need to understand the culture of where you work at. Of where you work at. So when I look at this ordinance, there's some good things in it. A lot of great things. I applaud the mayor. Because she's in a tough position right now because, she has to deal with the community. She's got to deal with the union, what they call the big bad union. The union can only do so much. The union has a job to do, and they fight for the office, but once certain rules are made, they're made. And don't care what the union does, certain things are implemented, is what it is. But you have to respect the process. And I respect the process. But I want the mayor, the chief of staff, and the chief, and those commanders to understand that a person who's been there, I know the culture. I understand the police culture. I understand the different biases. I understand the good old boy system. And we have to root out some of those things internally, even before we go outside, because, if I don't have that philosophy inside and we go outside, what good does it make? None. I could talk about the people outside in the communities and trying to fix that and all this outside, but the inside internal issues, that's what's going to really make this work. If we implement any of this today, we still got to fix the inside of the house. You know, Mr. Rivera, I know you and Mr. Chairman, you guys are very big history buffs. Look at movies. But, you know, I would ask that communities, police chief, mayor, if they haven't seen it, look at the movie American Skin. Look at the movie American Skin. And it portrays culture, it portrays bias, it portrays fear. Fear. And we have to be able to handle our fears when we're dealing with communities, different cultures. I can remember I made a mistake years ago, but I didn't know what I said was a bad thing because I had always been trained in my community that was normal to say. If you felt somebody was getting over on you, it was just a cultural thing to say, not knowing that I might have was offending my own friend, Mr. Dingfelder. But lucky he's a good friend and came to my defense because he knew I didn't know. I didn't understand. It takes understanding of culture and understanding of communities to have better policing. That's why you always hear me talk about community-oriented policing. Because when I was a young guy working at Mr. Submarine, which is now called Salim's Gyros at 40th and Hillsborough, and I see Officer Desmore come through there and get a steak sandwich, and I talked to him about policing, and he encouraged me to come on the force. You'll be a great guy to get there. Or I see John Bennett working at what was Winn-Dixie at 40th and Hillsborough. Al Sams, Marion Lewis. All comes in the hiring process. Understanding where one's fear is. Understanding where one's heart is. And asking those tough questions about, have you been around certain cultures, certain people? Asking those biased questions. Having veteran officers at the table at the interview process, because what questions a white person may ask, a black person or a brown person may have never heard that terminology before. It could end him not or her being employed because they didn't understand what that word means. Or being asked a question about marijuana. Hell, because my brother might have did something bad doesn't mean I did it. It doesn't mean that I do it. I was 10 years old, 12 years old, and I saw my 20-year-old brother do this and that. Am I my bad guy? You're going to hold that against me because my brother may did that or have a criminal history? Biases. Understanding culture. That's what has to be driven in everything we do in the city. When we talk about contracts, when we talk about anything we do, the fair, equitable distribution for everyone. I hear the Constitution. Hell, the Constitution ain't never been fair for black and brown people. There are a lot of things in there. I don't think anybody would argue that point with me, would they? Let's talk about Black Lives Matter. I don't agree with everything, but I understand what they're talking about. I don't agree with any looting or burning businesses. My family has a small business, so the hell to think that my business could have been burned would have been devastating. But I understand the frustration. But one thing I can say about Black Lives Matter, they never tried to take over the government or hurt anybody. They never did that. They might have showed their frustrations. But you talk about the Constitution, you talk about people storming the Capitol and thinking that hurting people, killing people. We're talking two different things. It's all in the hearts of people and what they believe in. If you never have a belief system of understanding other people, you can't believe in what they may have gone through. It's not about, ordinance here is not about want to take the rights of the police away. I love the police department. You know, I think sometimes we don't do the right thing sometimes. And then we have to backtrack and say, oh, we made a mistake then. That's all right. We correct our mistakes. So the public understands that. We're going to do better. But you can't do better unless you have the training and skills. I hear gentlemen talk about the shootings. I asked the police chief for a meeting. I haven't got that yet in reference to, I mentioned to Mr. Smith and Gina, our city attorney. When people tell me, well, you shot so many times. Shot too many times because, hell, it's fear. Because it's fear. We're trained a certain way. We're trained to where if I have an account, I'm looking for cover. If I'm in the open cover, I'm firing. Boom, boom, 2 shots. I'm stopping, I'm pausing. I'm looking to see where it's coming from again. And they're still on, I may pop up again. But I ain't just shooting all over the damn place, may hit anybody, because in my heart, I've been around shootings before. I've seen many people killed as a young boy in my own face. So my fear is a little bit different. Is when I walk up to a guy who's huffing and puffing, or Hispanic who's talking loud and his hands up. He ain't talking, he's expressing himself. He ain't gonna hurt you, he's expressing yourself. But you gotta understand and know people to understand how to deal with people. Me coaching little kids from a long time, understanding their homes, understanding what they go through, understanding a lot of young kids are taking care of themselves. People on drugs and alcohol. We talk about the Cahoots program. I don't know what the perfect program is. We have to find one. I don't know if mental health people in the cars with police officers will help or not. But if we don't try something, we continue to fail. I agree that sometimes we have a big health issue with mental health. I know. I've been in several instances where I've had a guy with knives standing there with me, 21 feet, I can shoot him, but do I shoot him? Or do I sit there and try to talk to him, calm him down? Or do I say because I have the opportunity because he's 21 feet away to shoot him? Fear. Fear. And I say it all the time, Mr. Vieira, you remember, heated debate about fear. You always say, I was in fear of my life. I was in fear. Absolutely. I'm going to shoot back. If I'm in fear, I'm going to protect, but I want to go home at night. Be it black, green, white, whoever you are. If I need to put you down, I'm going to put you down, and I'll explain it later. But I'm not going to let fear just overtake me and just do crazy things. I've been with officers who I had to say, hey, that was inappropriate. You were wrong the way you talked to that person. I'll say, stop. That's enough. Or loading charges up on a person, which one charge can mean one thing, you're still loading on the same charges. Why? Same outcome. These are what people are talking about. But again, there are good police officers who want to give back and have dinners and give to the homeless. Bring clothes from home and give. Give money to those who need it. Pull out their pocket for Christmas gifts. A lot of good officers. Communities want officers, they need officers. I don't believe in the over-policing. There's over-policing at times in certain communities because we need them, because we have things that are happening. But we also have to have solutions for them. And not be afraid of the political politics, say, well, because the black people might get mad. Well, that's not what the property owners are saying in the black community. They want the murders to stop. They want them to stop. They want their neighborhoods cleaned up. That's why I talk about rehab so much. If my place looks place, I feel great. I look great. But hell, if my place looks horrible, what do all I see? I see nothing but horror and terror all the time. That's how you change communities. That's how you change people. People are visual. And when you visual, it makes a difference of what you see and how you perceive people and perception. Perception sometimes is reality to people. It's reality. When you have people who don't see change or believe they're always someone with their foot on the neck, what do you get? You get complaints. You get activists saying this and this and that. Be it true or not, this is what you hear. So for me, this ordinance has good perks. Some things I disagree with still. But at some point, we have to have a compromise to move forward, to be forward thinking and say, okay, we've got this implemented, still what's wrong? Is there something still wrong? And then come back and look at what is still wrong. And if some things can't be compromised, it may go to a point where you say, hey, we can't come to agreement after this is implemented or before it even is implemented, to where it may need to go to the voters. Hell, it's their city. We're employed by them. And let them decide what they want. If we just can't do it as this body, or if the administration, we can't agree, or down the road, if it becomes an issue to where we need to make sure what the public wants for clear understanding. I say all the time when I first got here, communication is bad. John Bennett's been trying to work on that a lot. I praise him for that. Texting me all the time when things are going on, which I always tell him, why do you have to do that? There should be other department heads texting us, telling us, hey, this happened, what happened? But I praise him for the efforts that he puts forth all the time, the compromise that he tries to make. That's all you can ask for. Someone who will listen. That's all people want in communities, for someone just to listen, to vent. Mr. Daniels was here. We're trying our best. That item's coming up number 4. We're going to try to look at some other options. I know I will. We can't give up. We just can't give up. But what I would say to this council is that you have to understand the culture. You have to understand the house culture. And you have to see how you're going to blend them together to make them work, to get the best results. And I can tell you, to get the best results, you have to change the culture. You have to change the culture. I yield back to the chairman.
Thank you very much, sir. I don't know how to follow that up. You know, you said it all, and you said it very, I don't know. You said it all. I admire that, sir. Councilman Vieira.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it, and I agree. And Councilman Goods, I remember that debate very well at a church near Temple Terrace, because it was the first time that I was ever yelled at in public. And to quote Elvis Presley, I was all shook up. So I remember that very well, sir. And I remember the different challenges that came up here. You know, we have a really important issue that's coming before us here today with the Civilian Review Board. I just want to talk for 2 or 3, 4 minutes about it, if I may. You know, I want to start with a general preface because we've heard from a lot of different voices in public comment, and we've been hearing from people over the last year or so. And I think a lot of times we're getting what I call false choices on this issue. Our Chief Dugan at the very beginning of all this, and I think he's a good man and a fine public servant, said in the very beginning that you can be outraged by what happened to George Floyd. You can want change. You can want change based upon that outrage, but still support police officers, still respect the work that our law enforcement officers do, and still respect what their families go through. You know, hearing from our friend Councilman Goods and his over 25 years of service in Tampa Police Department, I can't replicate that because I've never been a cop. You give me a gun, I'll probably shoot my foot off. But you know, I think that's certainly something that's important. You know, about a year ago, we began a dialogue here in this city on the kind of change that we need. And if you take a look at the things that we've done here in the city of Tampa, a lot of it by the Castro administration, some of it through working with city council. You take a look at the change in direction on use of force with regards to a ban on chokeholds, with regards to a change on no knock or no warrant knocks, with regards to a duty to intervene, a duty to warn on shooting, changes in policy with regards to use of force, having FDLE take a look at incidents involving police officers where somebody dies, having an outside body outside of the city of Tampa take a look at that, taking a look at, as I'll talk about, this CRB ordinance put forth by the mayor and the thoughts of city council that no matter where we're going, we're making progress on that. We just got to, as I'll talk about, make sure that we don't bite off more than we can chew. I think that's very important. You take a look at something we've done with regards to implicit bias training for all of our City of Tampa employees, a dialogue that began back in 2018. You take a look at body cameras. The City of Tampa, in the midst of a pandemic where we're losing revenue, investing about $2 million in equipping all of our police officers with body cameras, something that I think most folks support. The good work done by our friend and colleague, Councilman John Dingfelder, with regards to committing up to $1 million, again, a lot of money, that we all support, in making sure that in mental health related calls, we can have a mental health professional go with a Tampa Police Department officer. You take a look at our budget. We caught a lot of heat from some folks on the budget. I'll say it, and I think we all agree with this. I stand with that. I've always said from the very beginning, there's an old saying that I believe in: you've got to be the same person on Saturday night that you are on Sunday morning. And I've always, whether I'm talking to a law enforcement officer or to an activist, always like to, give the same line. Because, when the votes are counted up here, you want to make sure that everything's consistent. And there's been a lot of emotion in the last year, and I've always wanted to be consistent on that. But with the budget from the very beginning, I said no to defunding the police, and I think we have as a body, but not just to that, but also to cutting the public safety budget, something that I've always opposed. I don't know in what reality within our growing city, with the service that our residents and our constituents rightfully demand when it comes to public safety, whether it's police, whether it's fire, whether it's EMS, that we can go from that. You take a look at our board, our CRB, good people. Colonel DJ Reyes recently joined that board. We have my good friend, Bemitra Liggins. You take a look at the original board. I always want to stand up for some of those original members that I think walk on water. People like Dr. Carolyn Collins, a woman whose integrity on civil rights, no one can ever question. My good friend, my colleague, Lincoln Tamayo, one of the finest men I know, who runs Academy Prep, just one of the best people. A man, Judge E.J. Salcinas, where I come from, the legal world, Judge Salcinas is a big deal because he has such a commitment to justice. Like many of y'all in the last year, we've had a lot of talks. I've talked to activists. I remember going with the mayor to a couple of meetings and talking with activists, et cetera. I went to the CRB about maybe 8 or 9 months ago or so, talked to folks there, et cetera. I've talked to a lot of law enforcement officers as well. I think we have to talk with a lot of folks. Again, you can support police accountability and also respect the work that our police officers do, but you've got to do both. You've got to do both. If you're going to support police accountability, you've also got to always say to police officers, we're doing this because government accountability, especially for folks who have potentially violence occurs in their job, but government accountability is as American as James Madison. That's just the way that it is. It is. And nobody's exempt from that. Not City Council, not the FBI, not TPD, not the IRS. Every single government body ought to be accountable, and that's just the way that it is. So change is not anti-police. We heard some folks speak today talking against the idea of a civilian review board. I strongly support it. I strongly support the mayor's changes. I'll talk about some ideas that I have as well that I think we can build on that. But that doesn't make you anti-law enforcement. You take a look at my record. If somebody knows certain things about me, it's one of them that I am proud to always stand with the work and the sacrifices of our first responders. Whether they are fire, whether they are EMS, whether they are police officers, they represent the best of our city. They represent the best of just so much. People who go into situations that people like me run from, and they do that for a living. Yes, we got to have accountability. Yes, we have to have regulation. Yes, we have to respond to the moment as we have as a city, but we've always got to have that respect down, and we've always got to communicate that respect. And if we ever find ourselves as elected officials running away from honoring and respecting law enforcement, then check yourself, because that's where we go wrong. That's where we go wrong. I think that this is a very good ordinance. There are two things that I want. There are two things that I want in this ordinance that I think are common sense. Number one is the issue of independent counsel for this board, for this body. I think, there's worries on this somehow being a tax on the budget. I think that through a common sense approach that says, and we can talk about that, limiting the hours, then with the consent of Ms. Grimes, our city attorney, to 10, 12, 15 hours a month at $150 an hour, which is a normal government hour budget for an attorney, by the way. About 150 is about there, that we can do that. I think that that's a good step that adds on just a little bit to this ordinance, right? That will go a really long way in terms of making it better. I feel strongly about that. With regards, and that's a position, by the way, that I've told the administration on numerous times and that I've said from the very beginning on it because I think it makes sense. Second is, we've talked the majority of the votes coming from Tampa City Council for this. I have a lot of concern about the service that a lot of the folks are doing there right now in the CRB. I want to respect that service. And if we make any changes on that, as I've said before from the beginning, we have to make sure that there is a transition where people voluntarily leave, and then any votes that come to us or the mayor, under whatever system we may adopt, respects that service. I don't want anybody to be kicked off this board, because I think the people that are on there, by all information that I have, are doing a very good job. That being said, we have a proposal right now for 11 members, 5 from the mayor, 5 from city council, 1 from the NAACP. I strongly support the NAACP position. We could, just throwing that out there, have that confirmed by Tampa City Council, so that becomes a council appointment through the NAACP, thereby taking care of that issue with regards to a majority of the votes of City Council. But no matter what we do here today, let's get this thing done today. We can't kick this can down the road anymore. People are watching in the community. Let's get this thing done today. No more continuances, no more. We've got enough right now where if we take all the stuff that we agree on, we can have a great ordinance that, again, builds on implicit bias, builds on body cameras, builds on use of force changes, builds on Councilman Dingfelder's championing of mental health issues, et cetera, to form a responsive agenda that really helps meet the moment, because there has been a moment. A lot of us have taken that very seriously. We have to, because of the moral issues of human rights and decency and civil rights and justice that are involved. We can do that, and I hope that we bring it home today, so to speak. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Anybody else? Councilman Citro?
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I want to thank the council members for speaking very passionately and articulating their points very well. First, I just want to say about this ordinance that I have heard from the ACLU, I have heard from our legal staff, I've heard from the PBA. Has anybody heard from the board itself?
No.
This board needs to be organic and forever growing and possibly forever changing. And what Councilman Vieira said, I've known a lot of these people on this board also. Not only in the legal profession, but you ask anybody in the city of Tampa about Mr. E.J. Salcinas, about one of the most knowledgeable person in this city, Miss Irene Guy, and again, Lincoln Tamayo. Again, this board needs to be organic and forever changing. And the part in this draft that I like the most is the board comes to us, City Council, annually, telling us what they want. If they want changes, we can hopefully accommodate them. If they want to keep things the same way, we can accommodate them. That is the biggest part of this draft ordinance, is that they have to appear live and in person to tell us how their board is handling the situations. Councilman Goods, you spoke of fear. And there are fear on all sides. And policemen have this fear, oh my God, what do I do? Am I going to say the right things? Am I going to do the right things? Is something going to come out of my mouth that shouldn't? If I touch somebody on the shoulder and say, have a nice day, will that be mistaken? But what this ordinance is going to do is an even a bigger word, and that's transparency. It's going to bring out a heck of a lot more transparency within our city. One of the people speaking today talked about the bias training. I jumped on the opportunity to be a part of that, and I heard from citizens, I heard from ACLU, I heard from the police department. And even the chief and other police officers that were present mentioned that there is change that has to be done. Mr. D'Angelo is always here speaking, giving us his opinion. And I've always made the statement that as a whole, I will always stand behind Tampa Police Department. One officer steps out of line should be dealt with quickly and within the power of the law. And I believe this is going to help make sure that if somebody does something wrong, they will be dealt with. My fellow council members, my brothers, we have batted the ball back and forth across the net for long enough. Let's make a stand. If we need to change anything on this, but let's move forward to show the citizens of Tampa that we are taking the initiative, and let's do something about this today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, sir. Anybody else? Councilman Carlson.
Yeah, just to go back to the genesis of this, I think everybody knows, in case anybody's watching for the first time, 2015, the Tampa Bay Times did an investigative series that discovered a thing called Biking While Black that showed racial discrimination pushed by the city of Tampa in the last administration. As a result, 22 civil rights groups got together and said we should not have this again. We need to make sure that we prevent it. And that's taken on many different forms. But one of the main things that they asked for was a citizen review board. The former city council, some of you are on it, started to create its own citizen review board, and the last mayor created his own, which was a shadow of what the community wanted. And so in my mind, this is just fixing a problem that was created 5 years ago. It is editing it. The negotiated version that's here now is light years ahead of that version that was created years ago, and legal can tell us, but I believe the way they set it up is this will replace that executive order and that ordinance, because those both had things in them that took powers away from city council, and I think vice versa. So we will be cleaning up some of the charter issues as well in this. But if we're cleaning it up and making it similar to other charter review or citizen review boards, several have said on the charter review board, then that by itself shouldn't be controversial. We're just trying to clean up and make it more effective. So I want to thank this mayor for working closely with city council and the community. I can tell you all on the day that the mayor presented her first version several months ago, I had already set up a meeting with Gina and the community to listen to their feedback, and Gina held the meeting at the mayor's orders anyway and started negotiating, editing it, even though the mayor just hours before had presented another version. And we've gone back and forth on it. I think the version we have is good. I want to thank Ursula and Gina and the whole team for working on it. Thank you to all of them for listening to the community, to listening to all sides. Like I said, the last version, PBA was not happy, and ACLU and others were not happy. But just to let everybody know, it's not just ACLU. There were 22 civil rights groups that came forward in 2015. And by the way, I missed an important point. They came on the heels of the United States Justice Department condemning the city of Tampa because of that policy that was in place, and saying that the U.S. Justice Department said that there were perceived or civil rights violations. And anybody who wants to freshen up on it, go back. What we need to do is make sure that we have the checks and balances in place. And even though we have a mayor now who works closely with us, we need to also protect the future and make sure that this kind of board does not become imbalanced. Even though I think this mayor would put great people on the board, there's always a possibility that we'll get another bad mayor and that they will try to push policies that will hurt the community like happened before. And we need to try to change that. So of the things that are still recommended by the community, the one that I would push for the most is to change the makeup of the board. The reason why it was set up this way last time is from the last mayor's executive order because he wanted to control everything, which has led to multiple problems in the region, killing the Tampa Bay brand, hurting our alliances in lots of different places. But this was a huge civil rights violation. We need to make sure that if we get a bad mayor who hurts the communities through civil rights violations, that the community is in charge of an oversight committee like this. So what I would propose, editing or just adding to the proposal that's on the table, is that each city council member would appoint one candidate, and then the mayor would, and this is not about this mayor, just making sure that the future, whoever is mayor would appoint 3, and then the mayor has proposed that NAACP would have a seat, and so that would make a total of 11. By the way, I think the mayor also offered a seat to the ACLU, and they declined because it's against their bylaws. But anyway, I think we're close to a good compromise at this point. There are some things the community still wants in it, and Gina's advice to them is that they should go to a charter amendment and see if the voters will put it in, because there are some powers that we cannot delegate that would be required charter changes. But if we can change the makeup of the board, I think it would make it more representative of the community. And as my colleagues have said, I don't think any of us are anti-police. We're pro-fairness in the community and pro-creating oversights. We've all got all kinds of oversights as well, and we just need to make sure the right systems and processes are in place to protect the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Councilman Miranda, then Councilman Goode.
Oh, right, okay,
Yeah, he has
give difference.
You're muted, sir. We can't hear you, Mr. Councilman Miranda. There's no volume. Are you unmuted? All right. Councilman Dingfelder, can you hear Miranda? You can? Okay, we can't hear him on this end. There you go. Go ahead, sir. Now it works.
Does it work better now?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I see Mr. Dingfelder and I can hear each other. I want to say thank you for the comments I've heard in the past, but let me say this before we start. There's not one document or one ordinance of any subsequence in the United States that hasn't been amended, including the United States Constitution. So let's start from there. I have worked with various mayors. They all had one thing in common: to make the city of Tampa better than when they left. They had many things that was not in common. They had those opportunities that they all had different personalities. They had different traits. They come from different society, from different angles. And not one of them that I ever thought in my life that did something that was inappropriately wrong to subdue the public. They had their own ways of doing things, just like all elected officials have their ways of doing their things. And I'm sure that this mayor and future mayors would have different personalities, different outlook in life, different outlook on constitutional matters. Like I said earlier, now one ordinance that I know of any substance hasn't been amended, including the United States Constitution. Let's put that in now. So what I see here certainly steps in the right direction by the elected official, the mayor, and by the City of Tampa's legal department to make a process of acceptance much viable for all. Is it amending the previous original one? Yes. But that's common sense that if you leave the same one in place forever, you're not going anywhere. Because as time goes on, people's idealism and people's realism of fear, of not fear, like Mr. Goode was talking about, is certainly prevalent in anyone's mind. So I'm thankful for the opportunity you have listened to Ms. Richardson and Mrs. Grimes this morning to make some changes. Is it perfect what everyone wants? No. Was the last one perfect what anyone wants? No. When you have two parties that come to a table, then they both leave not getting what they want, not a bad ordinance. You don't want one side getting everything, the other side nothing. So this is a compromise of sort. And in the future, I'm sure that this one will be amended as time change and things are necessary, needed to keep up with those changes. So I support what the mayor's put on. Out of the 11, I'm not certain how the 5, and 1. I've heard 5, 3, and whatever, and I've heard different things. So we'll work that out as we work through this ordinance today, and finally today we'll have a change in another ordinance. And I think it's good for society. I think it's good for the citizens. But above all, the best police officers in the world, you know who they are? Your mother and father. And I never forgot what my father told me once when he gave me that dime. And I asked, "What's the dime for, Daddy?" He said, "If you need help, call somebody else." That's when there was no cell phones and pay phones in every corner. And if you think that doesn't stick with you, you got another thing coming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councilman Goods.
Mr. Chairman, thank you again for the exception. I did leave one thing out, my last comments. Whatever we decide today to do, there was one portion, what I was saying, the cart before the horse, when I talked to Ms. Grimes. I'm not going to go into that, but I just want to make sure that whatever we pass, I may come back with a subsequent motion because I like this council to direct our city council attorney to draft any suggested revisions to the language in the CRB ordinance to ensure that the ordinance clearly supersedes ordinance number 2015-2021 in its entirety, so there is no question. This refers to the language of the ordinance, but does not include changes to the text of the new section 18-8. So just want to put that out there. That
Is that an official motion, or you're going to hold it?
I'm going to hold that off to after we have a deciding factor of the other policies per se, but I want to make sure that this ordinance is an ordinance. It supersedes the last ordinance with no question.
All right. Well, I think everything has been said. I'll go to you, Councilman Dingfelder, right after. Councilman Goods, you know, you said it all from a personal perspective because you've been on both sides of the aisle as a police officer serving the community for over 25 years, 26 years, I believe is the exact time, to serving on the Charter Review Board, to being a candidate, to being an elected official. So you've been on all sides of the aisle, and you told us in such detail your story growing up, your story as to how and what inspired you to become a police officer, and then moving forward and coming into the elected official position. Councilman Vieira has said everything very eloquently. Councilman Carlson, Councilman Citro, Councilman Miranda. I was here in 2015. I got sworn in April, and the discussion came up with the bicycling while black conversation that triggered the implementation of the board as it exists now. My purpose is this, at the end of the day, in this position as a public servant, is to do the right thing. It doesn't mean I have all the answers or the right answers or that it makes everybody happy, but you know, having been part of this discussion for almost 6 years now, I think it's time to bring this in for a landing. But as Councilman Miranda said, you know, the Constitution is a living, breathing document. It changes. You know, whatever we implement today, whatever does or does not happen, doesn't mean we can't revisit it. We can revisit it in the future, see what is working and what is not working, and add it and change it from there. It's not a, you know, one stop, this is it, end of the road thing. The conversation continues on. So I'll stop there. I know Councilman Dingfelder, I saw your hand go up. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you to all my fellow council members for your eloquence, especially Councilman Goods. As always, from the heart, you have tremendous experience and knowledge in this area, and we appreciate your guidance. I also appreciate our city attorney, Gina Grimes, and Chief Assistant City Attorney Ursula Richardson, who I've known both of them for many, many years, and they've worked very hard on this, and everybody on Gina on your team who's helped you with this. We appreciate you. So just because we might want to tweak, and sometimes we have questions, don't take that as the fact that we don't appreciate it. We do. I also appreciate TPD. And I've seen emails flying around that says, Dingfelder this, Dingfelder that. That's nonsense. I appreciate TPD. I think one of my best friends in this administration is John Bennett, who's former deputy chief of TPD. He knows how I feel. I also appreciate Chief Dugan and the work he's done. I think he's taken a lot of cheap shots, and I don't appreciate that. And I appreciate Mayor Castor. I think she's done a good job. She's no longer the chief of police. She's now the mayor. She wears a different hat, and I think she's doing a good job with that. Let me make this abundantly clear. This is not about this mayor. This is not about this chief, and this is not about this city council. This is not about the NAACP. This is not about the Tampa Patriot Group or the ACLU. It's not a red issue. It's not a blue issue. This is a community issue, and it's about making our community a better place for everybody. Councilman Goods, you said it very well. Perception is often reality. And that's really critical, because without change, the perception is, oh, it's the same old, same old. It's just a good old boy network, as you said, Councilman Goods. Well, sometimes we need to make some change and let people know that change can be perceived as the new reality. And what I've heard from the community is that this is a community that wants to have an unfiltered voice. They want to have confidence and trust that there is an independent police review board. And Louis, I think you said it very well. Part of that independence comes with who's sitting as the legal advisor. When we want independence, we look to Marty Shelby as our independent legal advisor who has no ties to anybody. And I think I agree with you, Louis. I think that that board needs to have an independent legal advisor. We're not saying that the advisor that's been doing the job now or that the other advisor who Ms. Grimes has proposed is doing a bad job or going to do a bad job or anything, but it's the perception that's important. We need to create a new CRB that demands accountability, responsibility, and transparency for the community as related to TPD, because as been pointed out, we serve the community and TPD serves the community. And I don't buy the argument that demanding high standards and having a strong CRB will negatively affect morale or police performance. I know TPD. TPD they know who those bad apples are, and they don't like those bad apples. And if the CRB helps get rid of some of those bad apples, I'm confident that TPD will be a better place and will support that. So I got a couple of questions and probably a couple of tweaks, and I want to address. I'll go ahead and take it on myself unless other folks want to. I'll address some of the comments that have been made earlier. These tweaks and these questions are not radical changes as we've been accused of in the newspaper. Radical changes, Marxist changes. No. Anyway, my first question, Ms. Grimes, is in paragraphs C1 and G1, when I'm reading them this week, it appears that under the proposed conditions, the board can only address closed internal investigations where TPD has made a finding of suspension, demotion, or termination. And counsel, I apologize for getting into the weeds on this, but I think it's important. But my question and my concern, Gina, is what happens under C1 or G1 if TPD does a full investigation and closes an investigation, but doesn't have a suspension, demotion, or termination? In other words, has no discipline. To me, when I read C1 and G1, it appears that the board, the CRB, and under that circumstance, would not have an opportunity to review that type of closed and internal investigation. And Mr. Chairman, I've got a couple of others, but I could get a response on that from Ms. Grimes. I appreciate it.
Sure. I know that was an issue that was raised by the ACLU in their letter, and it's not accurate. Even though C1 provides for review of closed investigations where there's discipline, if you look at section C5, it allows the CRB to review any completed internal affairs department investigation involving use of force and cases and issues of importance or interest to the community or the city. So they have the ability to review other cases under C5, and then under C6, they also have the ability to review matters of importance or interest and make recommendations regarding the department's handling of an issue, including revisions or additions to the department's policies or procedures. So it's very broad in its scope as far as their ability to review various different matters.
Okay, and I had a feeling you were going to say that, and I appreciate the explanation. So if it's our intent to allow the board to include a review of pretty much all closed internal investigations, regardless of what the final punishment is for that particular officer, then I kind of wish we would expressly include that in C1 and G1. Do you see any harm, Ms. Grimes, in including that in C1 and G1 if, as you say, we've already included it in C5 and C6?
I think the intent was, and Ursula can correct me if I'm wrong, but the intent was that all closed investigations with discipline would come to the CRB. And then these other cases, other types of cases that they may want to review, was up to the board to decide if they wanted to review those. Remember, they're going to be tracking every single complaint. They're going to be tracking every complaint that goes through.
But these other ones might slip through the cracks, and I think in some ways the other ones might even be the more important ones. Whereas if this community and/or the CRB doesn't agree with the chief's decision to not punish that officer at all, I would think those might be really, really important. So anyway, I appreciate that you answered that question. My other question.
I'm sorry, because I couldn't tell if you heard me or not, but you know that they will have a complaint tracking system, so they'll get to see each and every complaint as it comes in, and then as it goes through the process, they'll know the status of it. And so from the inception, if there's a complaint that they're interested in, they can certainly identify that and ask to review it regardless of whether or not discipline was imposed.
Okay.
So
right, I understand the tracking system. I just think that you've opined something very important today. I think it should be codified to expressly tell this board, if you want to look at those other types of cases, you have that power. Not implicit in your other powers, but express. So that's just my opinion. I'll get to it in a second. My only other question, and then I'll get on to some potential motions, Mr. Chairman, is this issue on an E1F, which has to do with qualifications of board members. And I want to know what the intent here is, because E1F is really confusing to me. As a matter of fact, I called another attorney during the break and I read them that provision and I said, what do you make of this? And it took us like 20 minutes to try and figure out what E1F says. But basically on the qualification issue, it speaks to whether or not if somebody is arrested for a felony and then this and that. And I agree. If somebody's facing a felony conviction, or if they've been convicted of a felony, I don't think we want them on this board. I'm fine with that. But what I thought used to be in the ordinance had to do with misdemeanors, and it disturbs me greatly because if somebody gets arrested for a misdemeanor, let's say for argument's sake for protesting out on the street, which we had 100 people get arrested for, does that potentially disqualify them? I think I'd like to know the answer to that. How do we feel about misdemeanors? It's not clear in E1F, and I'd like to see us clean that up so it's abundantly clear of what the qualifications are as related to people who've been arrested and or convicted for misdemeanors. Are they automatically excluded from this? That's my question, and then I'll get on to the rest, Mr. Chairman.
Ursula is going to address that change that we made
Councilman Dingfelder, the intent for E1F was that stemmed from conversations with the ACLU. The original version, I believe, of this ordinance, or the first draft of ordinance, was that no one who had been arrested was going to serve on the board at all. And the ACLU was arguing the point about different kind of crimes, et cetera, that a person may be convicted of that will keep them from serving. And so this was an effort to try and strike some balance that, to the extent that the board is supposed to be unbiased, someone who's been arrested by the Tampa Police Department, one would think probably has a large bias because they've been arrested. And so the intent was, if you've been arrested by the police department, you just can't serve for 2 years within that time frame, and that's regardless of whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor. And we made it specific to try and capture those people that the ACLU was concerned would be prevented from applying to serve on the board.
What if you got arrested for a misdemeanor and then you were, 2 weeks later, the judge dropped the charge? You are precluded by that mistaken arrest from serving for 2 years. I don't think that's right.
Only if it, I think that to say whether or not the arrest was mistaken or not, the whole point was, what kind of neutrality do you have as a person who's recently been arrested by the police department? Same thing as the one below it, which is, what kind of neutrality do you have if you have sued the police department or been a lawyer who's brought a lawsuit against the police department? In order to address those issues, we've said you're not totally precluded from serving, but at least let there be some time frame that has passed between when the event happened and your service that will give at least a bit more comfort about your potential neutrality.
Likewise, there's a
I think that's a policy question that council should wrestle with, correct? It's not a statutory question or a constitutional question or anything like that. Not even a charter question. It's a policy question.
There are a lot of policy issues in this ordinance, and we had to address them. I understand what you're saying. You don't like the legal department being involved in policy, and nor do we like the council being involved in legal issues. So I can respect what you're saying, but likewise, there's a similar disqualification for anyone within the last 2 years that served that was employed by TPD or any other law enforcement agency. They also are not going to be permitted to be on the CRB for that 2 year period. And the intent behind all of these qualification and disqualification requirements is to create as a neutral, unbiased board as possible.
I got it. Okay. All right, Mr. Chairman, let me get to the meat of these. In regard to the selection of members, I can't remember. I think that was, hold on.
Going to be making motions now or just discussion?
I'll go ahead and take on some motions unless.
Well, we had Councilman Vieira had perhaps mentioned Councilman Carlson, and then we can go to you and I know Councilman Good.
All right. Well, let me comment. Let me comment then on the motions that I heard then, just as a suggestion.
All right.
Councilman Vieira, in regard to the independent council, I agree with you completely. But our city attorney has spoken fairly, or has written us and spoken fairly adamantly that she believes that's a charter issue and potentially conflicts with her role in city government. And I don't mean to speak for you, Ms. Grimes, but that's what I think I've read and I think I've heard you say in the past. So Mr. Vieira, what I would suggest on that one, if you want to make the motion, is that we make a motion directing Mr. Shelby to draft the charter language, and that issue would come up on the next, either the next election, probably the next election of what would that be, 2022, the next opportunity that city voters have to go to the polls. And so I think that issue should, because we don't want to go crosswise with the city attorney. I think we've spent a lot of time on all these issues, and we don't need to pick fights there unnecessarily. But I think if the voters decide it's important enough to have independent counsel, we put it on the charter as a potential charter amendment and let the voters decide. And,
Ms. Dingfelder, in reference
Yes,
to that, I think you got two good points there, but I want to make sure, because that could be a while, make sure that we still, if we're going to move forward with this in any kind of form or fashion, that we still allow the independent counsel from the city attorney's office to work with them until that happens. Is that what you're suggesting, sir?
I don't know. I'd have to probably hear from Ms. Grimes on what her preference is on that. I do want to give deference to her as related to the role of the city attorney within the charter. I think it's up for argument, but I'm comfortable with the framework that the city attorney has provided at this point in time, as long as we have a motion that succeeds that put this on as a potential charter amendment. So it's sort of another compromise there.
Can I address that, Mr. Chairman? May I address that?
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to point out one thing.
Yes.
There is a difference between independent counsel and outside counsel. Mr. Dingfelder, you're correct that independent counsel is not something under the current charter that can be provided. The current charter provides that the city attorney is the legal advisor to all departments and boards. The CRB is a city board, so by charter, the city attorney would be the attorney for the CRB. The charter also says, and this is all in 5.01 subparagraph A, it also says that it's the duty of the city attorney to take management and control over all legal affairs of the city. And the reason it states that is because all boards and departments of the city potentially could expose the city to liability. So it's important for the city attorney's office to have management and control over all legal affairs of the city to ensure that those boards that may seem to act independently don't expose the city to liability. Employing outside counsel is part of the legal affairs of the city. I believe that the issue of independent counsel or outside counsel was raised because since 2015, the attorney for TPD has been the attorney to the CRB. What we proposed in this draft is instead to have a separate assistant city attorney. And in this case, I'll take the opportunity to introduce Mr. Carl Brody, who just joined our office from Pinellas County. And he has absolutely no affiliation with the police department, does no work for the police department, actually is from Pinellas County and has practiced there for 30 years, certified in local government law. He's just the kind of attorney that if I had to hire outside counsel, that I would hire. He's more than qualified to be an independent advisor to the CRB. And so that's why the proposal before you today provides for the assistant city attorney to serve as the legal advisor to the CRB, but not an attorney that has any affiliation or does any work for the police department. And then also it provides that if a conflict should arise between the CRB and the city, that outside counsel could then be engaged if it was a legal conflict. So I believe that the proposal that we have in the current draft addresses the concern of wanting some independent individual attorney to advise the board, not an attorney that advises the police department, and that if for some reason there would be a conflict, that we still have the option of hiring outside counsel. But independent counsel is not something that's permitted under the charter.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I'll just follow up on it. We appreciate the explanation, Ms. Grimes. I was pretty familiar with the direction that you've suggested on this, and I think I understand the rationale. I'm not butting heads with you to say we should do this today. What I'm doing is suggesting to Mr. Vieira because I think inherently there is a potential conflict every single day that board meets if you have inside counsel. And if it's not an actual inherent conflict, it's the perception of conflict. And so therefore, I would suggest, Mr. Vieira, that we let the voters decide. If they think it's important, we'll put it on as a ballot amendment, which we have the power to do, and let the voters decide that. And when we're all said and done, Mr. Chairman, well, I'd like you to, I'll step aside now and let everybody make whatever motions they want to make. Mr. Goods, I think your motion is very important about that this new ordinance supersedes all the old ordinance completely. In regard to the number of folks that are on the, that serve on this, I agree with Mr. Carlson that each council member should appoint one, which is 7, and that the mayor can appoint 4, including the NAACP person. And I think that will tip the scales back toward the community a little bit more and away from the mayor's office. And again, I'm not talking about this mayor. I'm not talking about Mr. Brody. When we make these changes, it's forever, you know, I mean, not forever, but it's, you know, hopefully it's for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. It's not about individuals, not about Mr. Brody or Ms. Grimes or the mayor or anything like that. This is long-term. Anyway, I'll step aside, and if you could come back to me at the very end, Mr. Chairman, I'd probably have one more motion that hasn't come up.
Very good. Councilman Vieira, sir, since you started it off, and we'll...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. So, you know, for me, depends what the meaning of is, right? So to speak. You know, council's always independent, or should be. And mind you, I want to be clear, we have no reason to believe that any counsel from the city attorney's office would not be independent, ethical, et cetera. There's a perception, which I want to talk about, that I think is important. But I think about the work that I've done. I've always done civil defense work, and often I'm retained by insurance companies, paid by them to represent their insureds in accidents. So let's say that you have $1 million policy, and I'm paid by X carrier to represent their insured. My fidelity is not to the insurance carrier. It should never be. It's to their insured, my client. So that's an issue of fidelity that all lawyers have to deal with. That being said, you know, I remember when I served on the Civil Service Review Board, we had Mr. Delano Stewart as our attorney. I believe right now Teresa Pierre Coy, I believe, is their attorney right now. So what I'd be looking for is outside counsel that I do not believe. When I say I do not believe, I say not from legal research or anything, just I'm not led to believe that would require something as large as a charter amendment and taking this thing to a voters. That's not what I was looking for. I think that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that this can be merely done through a tweak in the motion. What I'm looking at is, because I understand there's expenses involved with this, et cetera, merely contracted out, no more to be no more than 10 hours a month, saved with the consent of the city attorney's office at $150 an hour. That's what I'm seeking. I don't believe that there's the meetings go significantly more than that. Maybe they do. Maybe if they do, I'll be enlightened on that, I'm sure, very soon. So I'd be making that motion. Secondly, with regards...
I need to address these changes that you're making before we get too far down the road. I don't want to interrupt you now, but there's several changes I'm going to need to address. That's included as one of them.
Mr. Chair,
You go ahead, Ms. Grimes, or you...
As far as an ordinance directing the city attorney to hire outside counsel, as you know, that's outside the scope of council's authority to direct the affairs of any department, unless it's expressly provided for in the charter. Now, that includes directing the city attorney's office to hire outside counsel. And furthermore, I think it would be inaccurate to assume that the attorney is only going to be working 10 hours a month. A substantial amount of work needs to be done in order to train the board members as to their new duties and responsibilities, far more than 10 hours a month. So, and I don't know any attorney that I'm going to be able to hire for $150 an hour. So while it all sounds good, I don't think it's practical at all. And I don't know that it's something that we would agree to. We agreed to, and again, we're going back to what the charter says as to who has the authority to manage the legal department, and that is the city attorney. We go back to whether or not that you can direct the affairs of the legal department, and you can, and no more than you can direct the affairs of the police department under the charter. And that's why the mayor's consent and approval is something that's required with respect to these changes. So I just need to go on record as saying that. The other issues that you brought up about the appointments, I can address at the end of everybody's comments.
May I, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
Thank you. And obviously, Ms. Grimes' points are well taken. And again, I want to make sure with regards to the hour, over a certain amount would be at Ms. Grimes' discretion. There are certain months in which more would be required, maybe less would be required. With regards to the 150, could do 160, 165. There are, believe it or not, there are many attorneys in the area of insurance litigation who work in the 150 range. I don't know what the Civil Service Board attorney is paid, for example, but there are, if you go to some of these insurance defense law firms and whatnot. With regards to the appointments, you know, Councilman Carlson wishes to make a motion in that regard. My position in that regard, well, you know what? I'll get to that when Councilman Carlson talks about it. So I'll let him make the motion, but I have a position in that regard. But my motion would be to direct that to the extent that we can as a Tampa City Council with regards to outside counsel for this board with fiscal restraints that are agreed upon with the city attorney's office. Again, a very tiny change, but that I think would be very significant. Thank you.
We have a motion from Councilman Gear.
That's a request, right? It isn't, you cannot direct the affairs of the legal department, and who the legal department hires as outside counsel. That's not permitted under the charter.
And if I may, let me ask our own independent, our own counsel, Mr. Shelby, may I do that as a request or as a change to the ordinance, sir?
Well, you certainly can do, clearly you could do it as a request. And if you do it as directing, then you've heard what would be in fact a written response or a response that would come back in the future.
Yes.
So you know, govern yourselves accordingly. And obviously, I don't know whether it's appropriate or not for clarification's sake. You had mentioned other attorneys on other boards that were outside, and maybe there's a clarification or a distinction there, because that might explain why it's available for other places, but not perhaps for this board.
And thank you, sir. And we can inquire on that. What I'll do at this time is to make it a direction, and if that's going to be the city attorney's position, then we can be informed of that to go forward with it. But again, with fiscal context and restraints that are to be determined by the city attorney's office, would be my motion, because obviously, you know, you guys do what you're going to do, et cetera, but just merely having an attorney who is an outside counsel outside of the city attorney's office with fiscal restraints by the city attorney's office, so that we make sure that we are responsible in that regard. Again, my rationale being that a lot of boards here in the city of Tampa, whether by statute or via other means, have their own outside counsel. Very small, minor issue.
That's
but
not accurate.
I'm sorry, what, Ms. Grimes?
That's not accurate. The only boards that have outside counsel are those boards where there's a conflict between the city and the duty of the board. And I've provided for that in this draft, that if there is a conflict between the city and the duties of the board, then we would engage outside counsel. But the only boards that have outside counsel are the ones where the city is actually prosecuting a case in front of that board.
Sure, and I may have misspoken by the word many, but correct me if I'm wrong. Does our Civil Service Board not have separate outside counsel who is retained and paid by the hour?
Yes, it's because there is a conflict between the position of the city and the duties of the board. The board is making a decision, and the city is prosecuting effectively a case in front of that board. So there is a legal conflict. That's something that I've provided for in this ordinance.
I'll withdraw then the rationale for it in terms of other boards, but I still think even if you take aside my apparently incorrect assumption as to the rationale for the Civil Service Board having their own attorney, I still do think that given the appearance to such a sensitive issue to the public of a conflict, that would certainly make sense, and my motion stands, albeit with different rationale. Thank you.
A question, Chair.
Councilman Goods.
So I can have it clear in my head. Mr. Shelby is the city council outside counsel, correct? Mr. Grimes?
Yep. He's not outside counsel, he's an employee of the city of Tampa.
But he
Under the charter, he's the legal advisor to the city council.
Okay, all right. So
Same as Mr. Brody would be. And as you all may recall, I even offered Mr. Shelby the opportunity to take this position as the attorney for the CRB, but he declined because of a perceived conflict. And that's why we then defaulted to another assistant city attorney who's new to the city and would be able to provide legal advice to the CRB.
I recall. I was just asking because I like the way Mr. Shelby does business, regardless if whatever conflicts he may have with the city attorney's office, it be interpretation, whatever. He makes sure this council is aware of its responsibilities and its roles and its rights. So that's the kind of road I was looking at and making sure I had the clarification of Mr. Shelby's role versus what Mr. Vieira or Mr. Dingfellow was talking about. So I yield, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Just real quick.
If I'm
Yes,
sorry,
sir.
I'm
Yes,
sorry,
sir.
but to follow up, Councilman Goods, because you brought an interesting point, that provision for a city council attorney is expressly stated in your charter. That's a charter-created position. And
Right.
and what that does is that sets forth the duties and responsibilities, also who, in fact, the city council attorney answers to and is hired and fired by. So that's all set forth in the charter.
And I think it's by by
That's
this
correct.
council, correct?
Sorry, sir?
And your position is by this council, correct?
I was hired by the Tampa City Council, and I am, in fact, as Ms. Grimes stated, I am an employee of the city, but my duties and responsibilities are set forth in the charter, and you are my clients, and you are the only people within this city I answer to.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, just a few questions. The gentleman's name is Mr. Brody, correct?
Correct.
And Mr.
He's here
Brody
in the
would
conference
be,
room with us.
he would be dedicated to strictly the Citizens Review Board? I'm sorry, Civilian Review Board?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the gentleman
Mr.
is
Brody
from,
is right here.
okay, the gentleman is from Pinellas, has been there 30 years, has no ties to the police department. And if I remember, I wasn't here, but from what I was told, when Mr. Shelby was one of the applicants for the position here in Tampa City Council, he may or may not have said, I don't remember what the exact words were, I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm not from here. So I'm looking at it as this gentleman is from Pinellas. He's, not in the city of Tampa, not affiliated with the police department, not, there's no bias in that sense because he is essentially independent. Being that he's, from another community, he's another set of eyes that are looking at this from the outside in many ways. That's just my opinion. Councilman Vieira.
And if I may, the motion merely makes the request, and we can have the dialogue between now and the reading of the ordinance and whatnot, where we can have a more robust discussion on some of the implications of this, I guess, if you will. But my motion still stands.
Mr. Shelby.
For a second to the motion, I'm sorry.
Not
Madam
yet.
Clerk.
Councilman Vieira has made a motion. Is there a second?
Can you restate the motion, Mr. Chairman?
No, sure. My motion is to have Tampa City Council request that the Civilian Review Board under the amended ordinance have its own separate privately contracted hourly attorney with the fiscal constraints to be created and governed by the city attorney's office.
We have a motion from Councilman Vieira with a second from Councilman Carlson. Councilman Dingfelder, I think I see your hand, sir. And Councilman Miranda as well. Councilman Dingfelder, then Miranda.
Yeah, and I don't mean to belabor this. I was going to second the motion just because I don't, I think people should have an opportunity for things to be voted on. But I'm not going to support the motion just because I knew we were going to run into this issue of the city attorney's charter powers, and Ms. Grimes feels very strongly about it. And I don't think it's going to get resolved between now and ever because of how strongly she feels about it from a legal perspective. So that's why I've suggested that on two major issues of independent counsel and also subpoena power that I want to talk about in a minute, that we as a board, those are important issues to the community. They can't be resolved with our city attorney, that both of those issues should be put on the ballot. And that's why, Mr. Vieira, you and I both agree that we should have independent counsel. I just think we disagree in terms of how we get there. But I think we let the community decide through their ballot whether or not they think it's important or not. So I just wanted to explain why I would vote no on your motion. I apologize.
Thank you very much. Councilman Miranda, then Councilman Good. You're muted, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I remember what the charter says specifically, the city attorney is the attorney for both the administration and the city council. Am I correct?
That's correct.
All right, so as I go from there, that's correct. And you go from there, what I see coming, or could be coming, is you're going to have another divisive nail that you're going to have now. They want to go to the charter. They want to have their own city attorney, not one attorney. And by the way, no matter how long I've been here, I have yet to see one city attorney be in any way biased. To my, maybe somebody else thinks differently, but to me, one-way bias against the administration or against the council. At times, they rule against council members through the charter position, and at times they rule against administration. I've seen both sides. So, and then, as I understand what I heard, if I understand everything I heard, this city attorney is saying that it is against the charter to do exactly what we're trying to do. And yet we want to do it. So now we're going to hire an attorney to see who is who and for what. What is the fight about? They have an individual. He named the individual. He's experienced. He does not work for the Tampa Police Department. He is an employee of the city of Tampa. And so are others. So what am I here for? For over 40 minutes now, we've been talking to this one issue. And we haven't done a damn thing. What's wrong with us? Forget about the attorneys. What's wrong with us? Is it good or is it bad? Should it go to a charter? Put it on the charter in the next election, see what happens. So what are we doing? We're going to stalemate this thing all day and all night and come up with nothing? Let the public vote when they have a chance. But right now, we can talk this until the Greyhounds come home.
The Greyhounds.
And it's not going to, yeah, the Greyhounds, because they run real fast.
That's right.
So, where are we going? Let's have some common sense here. And let's get this thing so that the public understands exactly what we're doing. Don't get stuck aware of this and the other. Is it good to have what we're doing? It's an improvement over the past, and I'm sure in the future it'll be amended. So what? That's normal, because you have to keep up with the trends of life. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councilman Good.
Oh, sorry.
And then Councilman Vieira.
Mr. Dingfelder, your points are very well taken. So is Mr. Vieira, but I think if Mr. Vieira has a good motion on the floor at this particular time, and I think if you were going to make a subsequent motion for a charter amendment, like Mr. Miranda said, that's a subsequent motion to where if we support that, we move on. But I think we can at least vote on this particular thing right now to get some to go ahead and get the driver, the chauffeur moving. And if you have a subsequent ordinance that you want to put on the charter amendment ballot, I think that's a different motion. Just my opinion.
And if I may, I'll amend my motion because again, I want to be very clear. I haven't had This particular discussion on this narrowly tailored issue as to the charter relevancy with the issue of an attorney. So what I'm doing my motion on is to make that request with a report to be given to us when this issue comes back to us, so that this isn't continually living on forever, on whether or not we need to do a charter amendment or what other steps we need to do. If we want to go ahead and proceed to get the ball rolling with a charter amendment, this will actually begin to do that, if that's where we want to go.
We have a motion from Councilman Vieira with a second from Councilman Carlson. Roll call vote.
Vieira.
Yes.
Goods. Dingfelder.
No.
Maniscalco.
No.
Carlson.
Yes.
Citro.
With all due respect, no.
Miranda.
No.
Motion failed with Councilmember Miranda voting no. Councilmember Citro voting no. Councilmember Maniscalco voting no. Councilmember Dingfelder voting no.
What's the next motion? Councilman
Chairman.
Carlson, I believe, was next, sir. Yes, sir.
If you all want to get feedback before I make a motion, you can. But my motion would be to amend the proposal to change the makeup of the board to be 7 representatives appointed, 1 by each city council member, and 4 by the mayor, of which 1 would be the NAACP representative.
We have a motion from Councilmember Carlson. I believe Councilman Miranda with the second. Roll call vote.
And
Discussion, I'm sorry, Mr.
Councilman,
Chairman.
any discussion? Councilman Vieira?
just really fast on this, I do support a majority of the appointments, as I've said from day one, being from Tampa City Council, but there must be a method by which we allow the present board members who have served honorably to transition off. I do not see that in how, frankly, that can be done in this motion. I think that a split of 5-4, 6-5, whatever it may be, would be much better than this. I think that a 7-1 split goes from one extreme to the other. Again, Tampa City Council should have a majority of the votes, but I think that this doesn't give enough due deference to the service of the folks on the board, and it goes to another extreme, in my opinion. Thank you.
Councilman Miranda, Councilman Dingfelder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The only reason I second that, the way I do my math, there's 8 elected officials in the city, 1 mayor and 7 council members. The way I look at it, these council members got 1 vote to put whoever they chose to put on that board, and the mayor's got 4. So I think that's equity. I don't believe that this is no way a slap at this administration or this mayor or anyone else in that side of the government, the administration. This is another kink that I said should be changed, and who knows what the next council in 4 or 5 years from now, or 2 years from now is going to do. But I think this is equitable, and that doesn't mean that the ones that are there now we're going to transition them off. I can guarantee you that. Thank you.
Councilman Dingfelder, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to clarify the motion along those lines, the maker of the motion, Mr. Carlson, to clarify, the mayor would, one of the mayor's 4 votes would be the NAACP position. And that's a question, Mr. Carlson. And the second question relates to Mr. Vieira's very sensible request, is that we would direct legal staff to build in some transition language to make sure that that no existing person got bumped off.
Councilman Carlson.
In other words, they get to serve out their term.
Yeah, the answer to the first one is yes, and I think you kind of put this in better words a little while ago than I did, so I used those words. But the appointment of the NAACP person was a suggestion of the mayor anyway, and so that way the mayor could work with the NAACP to figure out who the best representative is. And to Councilman Vieira's point, I don't know exactly the mechanism. We can work that out later. But what if we just added to be appointed upon the expiration of the terms of the current representatives?
Exactly. Perfect. Sounds good.
Very good. We have a...
Or when vacancies appear.
Yeah. When Councilman Carlson's made the motion, second from Councilman Miranda, just real quick, we're 7 elected city council members by the people. I think this is fair. The mayor will have 3, then there's the NAACP. The mayor is head of the police department. There's a police chief, but there's a mayor above that. I think this is equitable. Council members have the majority of appointments. I brought this up in the previous administration 6 years ago. There was a struggle there. There was a fight there. Whatever. I think this is fair and balanced. I think this is the right way to go. So I'm going to definitely support this. Motion from Councilman Carlson, second from Councilman Miranda. Roll call vote.
Vieira,
And if I may, I want to see more specifics on this. Again, I've been very clear that there has to be a good transition for board members, and this is going to pass, but I want to see more specifics on this before I could support this. So when this is the Godfather Part 1, when the Godfather Part 2 comes out, I may vote for it, but for right now, I'm going to vote a respectful no. Thank you.
Ms. Vieira?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Council, and if you'd like to go first, I just had a question for Mr. Vieira, actually the maker of the motion, in terms of allowing, when the city attorney comes back, the latitude within the confines of what the city council's intention is to create the mechanism and the language for that, to have them have that latitude rather than be specific to the motion. I'm just wondering if that's acceptable to the maker, or whatever council's intent is. I just wanted to be able to be clear to the legal department what council's direction.
Yeah, and I just want to see that. That's all. That's all. Out of which, by the way, we all share, out of respect for all the people that serve there right now, I just want to see that before supporting going down this route. That's all. That's all.
Well, I was going to say, Ms. Vera, if you have specifics right now, you want to lay those out. That way the city attorney kind of knows how you are thinking, sir. Or you just rather just wait.
I think that's something that's got to be worked out between now and the next meeting. And we probably shouldn't do it here right now, my opinion, because it'll probably take too darn long,
Okay, sir.
Councilman Carlson.
Yeah, if I could just add, several of you talked about the quality of the people that are on the board now, and I've not heard any complaints about any of them, and I know many of them, and they're very respectable people, and so I echo the same concerns. I want to make sure that they're able to serve out their term. That's why I added that other part. So thank you.
Councilman Carlson has the motion, second from Councilmember Miranda. Roll call vote.
Vieira. No. Goods.
Yes.
Dingfelder.
Yes.
Maniscalco.
Yes.
Carlson. Yes. Citro.
Yes.
Miranda.
Yes.
Motion carried with Councilmember Vieira voting no.
And next up, Councilman John Dingfelder, you have your motion, sir.
I've got a couple of them. Number one, unless Councilman Goods wants to make it, because he brought it up earlier, that legal department make it abundantly and expressly clear that this new ordinance completely and 100% supersedes the existing ordinance in every way, shape, or form.
Councilman Goods, would you like to make that motion? He brought it up before, so.
It's up to him.
I'd like to address that.
Go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if you recall, but we discussed this at the November workshop. I was the one that proposed that we present both an ordinance and an executive order that repealed the 2015 ordinance and the 2015 executive order. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at the ordinances and the executive order that I presented to you, but it does already say what you're asking me to draft. It says that it is repealed and supersedes the earlier 2015 ordinance and the earlier 2015 executive order. And the intent behind that was that we wanted to wipe the slate clean and remove from adoption any of the statements made about who had the power to create the CRB. It's important to also recognize this, that the charter has changed since this discussion regarding creation of the CRB occurred in 2015. So there was a question in 2015 who had the power to create the CRB. The charter has been changed and it's clear. Both the city council and the mayor each have the authority to create a board. However, whichever entity creates the board, if it's city council, it's subject to the approval of the mayor. If it's the mayor that creates the board, her executive order is subject to the approval of city council. So even with all of these changes that you're proposing, I just want to make it clear that the creation of the CRB in the form that it's now drafted and with these additional changes is still subject to the approval of the mayor at the end of the day.
Mr. Chairman?
Councilman Goods, Councilman Dingfelder.
I sat on that charter review, and I don't remember that verbiage. I don't remember that the mayor would have powers over the council.
I think somebody slid it in after.
Right, and I right, because that was never the intent of the charter review. So, and I understand that may be the interpretation at this particular point, but I assure you that in the near real future that I'm going to probably make a motion that Mr. Shelby into this council look at that issue and probably take that back to the voters as a charter amendment. That needs to be, we have to have separation of powers. We cannot have two things intertwined. And I believe that the former attorney, I don't want to say misrepresentatives, but I don't recall the Charter Review Commission saying that we have intertwined powers that way. It doesn't work that way. And I know I have two other members that sit on that board. So we Mr. Shelby, I'm sure after this, all councilmen will probably send you a memo in reference to getting with Mr. Grimes, because that's going to have to be changed. I'm just saying that's going to have to be changed.
Councilman Dingfelder.
Mr. Booth,
Yes, ma'am.
with all due
Grimes.
respect,
Yes, ma'am.
I went back and listened to the audio tapes from those charter review board hearings. I listened to them. I had two other assistant city attorneys here listening to them as well. And it was clear to me and to us that the intent was to create an equal authority in the city council as existed in the mayor. The mayor cannot create a board without the approval of the city council. And likewise, it was intended to create that same power for city council, which was to give them the authority to create a board upon the approval of the mayor. So
and again, I respect that. I respect that. I respect that, but in my mind, I don't think that was the way we were intended to go. But if that's the way it is, fine. But I think at this point, I see a lot of complications with that going down the road, and we may have to address that another time.
Mr. Shelby, I saw your hand up, and then Mr. Dingfelder, sir.
Well, counsel, I just want to reiterate that the way this is being brought forth and presented to council, I appreciate Ms. Grimes superseding, and I understand your intent, Councilman Goods, was just to, and I believe I've had the opportunity to discuss this with the city attorney, to be able to flesh out perhaps the whereas clauses, and also just to make it clear, let's say, for instance, the words in its entirety, just so there's no question in city council's mind or in a future city attorney's mind or in the public's mind as to the effect of the 2015 ordinance, and whatever problems were delineated by that ordinance in the city attorney's memo of September 2020 is now rendered moot because that ordinance is now superseded by whatever's going to be forthcoming. So, Councilman Goods, I understand your motion. I've had the opportunity to discuss it with Ms. Grimes, and between now and whenever it comes back for first reading, I certainly will work closely and give her a draft and let her review that to see if it's appropriate to incorporate, which I think we can work that out.
Councilman Dingfelder.
Well, as Mr. Miranda said, we don't have time today to get into these disputes that might exist about interpretation. I will say, Ms. Grimes, that we also have a conflict with one of the key provisions of the charter that says that city council is the sole legislative body. There's no exceptions on that provision. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure I've read it 30 times recently.
There is.
There is
an exception.
We are the sole legislative authority, but I don't want to get into it, okay? Bottom line is that obviously there's lots of differing opinions bouncing around this issue and these issues, okay? They do need to get resolved by the voters in a charter change. But in regard to the motion that I was about to make, and I'll soften up the motion a little bit, and I'll just direct Mr. Shelby to work with the city attorney to make sure that it's abundantly clear that the ordinance we're about to pass, hopefully, will 100% supersede the prior ordinance. That's my motion.
Say,
Wait, we had your motion on the floor, didn't we?
I didn't make the motion.
Oh, you
I'm
didn't
going
make
to-
it?
We can start a conversation.
Before we go to that, Councilman Carlson, and then we'll take a vote and all
Was there a
that.
second? I'm sorry.
Second.
Okay, thank you.
You didn't want to say anything? No. Oh, okay.
Just, look, there were things, a discussion for another day is what happened or didn't happen at the Charter Review Commission. Several of us were on it. Things popped up that I think several of us don't remember happen. And I can tell you that in those meetings, anybody who goes back and watches them, they'll see that the former city attorney essentially yelled at me from the dais and argued with me about how I was trying to balance the powers between city council and the mayor. And I said, that's what the city council asked us to do. And so anyway, that's another discussion for another day. What I wanted to say is that I very much appreciate having Ms. Grimes, and I've known her for a long time and I trust her. I always try to take legal advice unless I don't trust someone, and so I'm listening to her advice. The good thing in this situation is even if we don't agree with the underlying premise, Ms. Grimes, her team, Chief Bennett, who we haven't mentioned yet, and the mayor herself have all agreed with almost everything that we in the community have put on the table. They've listened to all sides and they put everything on the table. And I feel confident, even though we're tweaking this some and even changing some of the perceived powers, I feel confident that that team will come back and they'll work with us on it and either accept it or work with us. And so I would like to put these proposals forward in good faith and hope to hear good news whenever it comes back. And just, thanks again to everybody for your ethics and honor in working on this.
Yes, sir. Yes, Councilman Dingfelder.
So we didn't vote on that yet. We still have to vote on it.
There's a motion, and I'm going to get a second. Who made the second? Councilman Goods made the second. Roll call vote.
Miranda,
Yes.
Citro,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Maniscalco, Vieira,
And this was on superseding, correct?
yes, sir.
Okay, yes.
Goods, Dingfelder,
Yes.
motion carried unanimously.
Yes, Councilman Dingfelder. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, I wanted to address my two little cleanup items. I know not a lot of enthusiasm around the table, but I think they're important. Number one, as related to misdemeanors, I think if somebody is possibly arrested for a misdemeanor and they don't get convicted, they shouldn't be thrown off of this panel. I mean, what if somebody's sitting on the panel, Lewis, and they get arrested for some little misdemeanor, and ultimately the misdemeanor is discharged and dismissed? Do they get thrown off the panel? That's the way the ordinance currently reads. So I would just say we would preclude somebody if they've been convicted of a misdemeanor, but not necessarily just arrested for a misdemeanor. So that I need to make it as two separate motions. I would
Very
direct the
good.
legal department to
Yeah.
clarify that provision. So a mere misdemeanor arrest doesn't preclude somebody from serving, only a misdemeanor conviction.
Do we have a second? Do we have a second? I'm going to hand the...
I'll second for
Okay.
discussion.
We have a second from Councilman Miranda. Any discussion?
What,
Yep.
if
Yes,
I
sir.
may, so right now, correct me if I'm wrong, if they've been arrested, they have to wait, wait 2 years?
Correct. That's what Ms. Grimes told us, or Ms. Richardson.
That's correct.
I mean, waiting 2 years, it doesn't preclude them forever from serving on the board.
It means they'd get thrown off. It means they'd get thrown off the board if they got arrested and not convicted. That's the way it reads right now.
Gotta think about that.
All right, we have a motion from Councilman Dingfelder, second from Councilman Miranda. Sometimes people make mistakes, and you shouldn't, you don't have to throw the book at them just because of that. We're humans. Roll call vote.
Mr.
Wait,
Chairman,
Councilman Goods.
let me make sure I have it correct. Person is arrested
Of a misdemeanor.
of a misdemeanor, but not convicted. But during that time, are we saying that person's dismissed until their case is clear, or have so many months or days to get that cleared up? Or what are we saying? Just, I think if you got arrested, you know, and this is my opinion, I think if you got arrested, you know, with anything, even here at the city, if you're arrested, you have to go through a process, and a lot of times you're suspended with pay or without pay until the outcome of that is done. I think that's a fair portion, because you need to have time to do what you have to do to get yourself cleared or allegations, but you shouldn't be serving on the board if you're arrested and pending some charges. How long are you going to wait? That's the only problem I have is, I don't have a problem with somebody having had a misdemeanor and it was arrested. But how long do you wait to give them a period to clear that up, and they're serving on a board that deals with police issues and citizen issues?
Councilman Dingfield.
Okay, let's say this has nothing to do with the cops whatsoever. Orlando, let's say that somebody gets a misdemeanor for a trespass because they walked on their neighbor's property and their neighbor filed a trespass against them. That's a misdemeanor. It's a third-degree misdemeanor. It's very inconsequential, okay? But now, if they happen to be serving on this board, all of a sudden we're concluding that they're biased against cops. Cops had nothing to do with it. It was their neighbor who did it.
Let's take
That's the example that I'm giving. I'm sure there's another 100 examples. All I'm saying is, let me finish, please. All I'm saying is, if they get convicted of the misdemeanor, then they can be thrown off the board or not eligible to serve on the board for 2 years. But merely getting arrested, whatever happened to the presumption of innocence?
Oh, I agree with you. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, you're arrested, whether it be for trespassing or jaywalking, whatever. But if you're arrested, but you're sitting on this type of a board, I would think that you would need to be have a grace period to say, okay, you clean this up into a matter of time. I'm not saying just kick the person off, but with anything, even within the city government, if you're arrested for whatever, you have 30, 60 days to get that cleared up or whatever before anything else is imposed. And that's all I'm saying.
Councilman Vieira, you have your hand up, and Councilman Citro.
For the purpose of time,
if I could chime in,
This is Ursula Richardson. For the purposes of the discussion that you're having about E1F, if you look at the language, it's only as to the Tampa Police Department. So if you were arrested for a misdemeanor that you were cleared of over in St. Petersburg or Temple Terrace or any other jurisdiction, the whole point is this board has been formed for the Tampa Police Department, and we're trying to look for neutrality for the board that is making decisions about the Tampa Police Department. And so that is why we limited it only to arrests, regardless of whether they're misdemeanors or felonies, that have been made by this particular department. Because it does, as Councilman says, there would be the perception that the person cannot be neutral if they've been arrested by the same department, and or if a case involving the officer who arrested them comes before the board. What kind of neutrality do you have? And even if they say they could be neutral, there is a perception that they could not be.
Should we just vote on this, if I got a second?
Wait, we have Vieira, you had your hand up.
Just now, the suggestion, everybody can have a motion.
Councilman
Everybody
Citro.
has a part during the discussion. I thank you very much for bringing that point up.
Miranda.
If I was arrested for a misdemeanor that I did not commit, and then I was put on leave on this board, would I be biased? Oh, hell yeah, I'd be biased. But that's the point that I think Councilman Goods was making. If you're arrested, regardless of the outcome, you should be off the board for that amount of time. But then we would have to have alternates. So I understand everybody's point on this, and Councilman Dingfelder, you make a damn good point. But if I'm arrested for a misdemeanor and I didn't commit it, after I get done clearing my name, am I going to be biased? Oh, hell yes.
Councilman Miranda.
Well, the reason I second it, because the other thing that I do for my life is I hear things that people applying for a certain license in a certain vicinity, and if they have anything like a DUI or they have a criminal record or have any kind of record, they must put it down on the application when they're applying, and they must bring to the element all the information that they have been exonerated from everything else that was there. And we accept that. However, sometimes I'm the judge of the jury. That happens in front of me. And we take that individual's prerogative to work, really. And after he clears it up, you know what I do? Get back in. So I don't hold it against anybody. So I guess I'm being prejudiced against myself. Thank you.
Councilman Dingfelder, you had a motion on the floor, sir. Anything else? You have a motion. You have a second from Councilman Miranda, I believe. Roll call vote.
Vieira,
Can I hear the motion again?
Yes, can we get clarification on the motion? Councilman Dingfelder, if you read it again, just for the clerk and for Councilman Vieira and anyone listening.
Sure, the directing the legal department to fix, I don't have the provision, fix the qualification provision, which would allow for somebody to continue to serve and or be qualified to be appointed, even if they had a misdemeanor arrest, as long as they did not have a misdemeanor conviction.
Now, I could support it if the motion was to address any inequities that could arise in that. I think that a blanket repeal of that goes too far and could have unintended consequences. Again, taking a look at a more narrowly tailored fix that gives the city attorney discretion, I would support that. I think this is a blanket repeal that could have unintended consequences. Therefore, I will vote no.
Yes, Mr. Shelby.
And if I'm incorrect, I'd ask that Ms. Richardson confirms that I believe you're referring to E1F, Councilman. I believe that's the provision.
Yes. That's what he had mentioned
Yes.
earlier.
Yes.
All right, we have a motion from Councilman Dingfelder, second from Councilman Miranda.
Yes,
Roll call vote.
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
You know, Ms. Dingfelder, I could support your motion, but I would need legal to look at some circumstances to where you have a person on leave during that time, some other things like that, for I could give full support of that. I think that a person arrested and they're sitting on this type of board needs to be removed from the board until their issues are cleared up, and with a grace period time and so forth. So if you're willing to amend your motion.
I'll accept it. I'll accept that as a friendly amendment to ask legal to specifically include that language that any currently serving board member would be temporarily take a leave during the pendency of that misdemeanor process.
Councilman Carlson, you had a comment, question?
No, I think that's okay. I wanted something like that.
Very good. We have a motion from Councilman Dingfelder, second from Councilman Miranda. Roll call vote.
Vieira,
With that, I will say yes.
Goulds,
Yes.
Miranda,
Yes.
Citro,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Maniscalco,
Yes.
Dingfelder.
Yes.
Motion carried unanimously.
And Mr. Chair, I have to leave in a few minutes to pick up my son.
We have a night meeting at 5 as well.
I mean,
in 2 hours, so.
I have
just-
to.
Mr. Chairman,
No, that's fine.
before you leave, Louis, let me throw out probably the most important issue, which is I'd like to direct legal to draft charter language. And maybe they don't even have to come back on March 18th. They could come back at the subsequent meeting in April. But to draft charter language as related to independent counsel, that the CRB may, at its discretion, hire independent counsel. Maybe they decide they don't want independent counsel, but at least they have the discretion to do that. Number one, and B, that they have limited subpoena power. And specifically, when I say limited subpoena power, before everybody freaks out, the subpoena power would be as follows. On the review and approval of the attorney for the CRB as to legal sufficiency, the CRB may issue subpoenas for witnesses, documents, and other potential evidence for all matters within the CRB's jurisdiction. However, except as may be prohibited by applicable law. However, nothing herein authorizes the CRB to issue a subpoena to a law enforcement officer. So that's why I say they would have limited subpoena power. That would be the express language that would go on the charter ballot, and so everybody knows what they're voting.
Councilman Dingfelder, just a point of clarification. I understand that people have been talking about the subpoena power issue, but the subpoena power issue, when we're talking about the city of Miami, came as a part of that body being made an investigatory body. So it's not, the subpoena power wasn't just giving them subpoena power, it was giving them the ability to essentially be a complete department with investigators, executive staff.
Is that what you're advocating? Is that what you're advocating?
No,
Complete investigator? Okay. So I'm not advocating that either. What I'm advocating is that people of this community decide whether or not this board is important enough to have subpoena power. I understand what you're saying, Ms. Richardson, completely. Okay, I'm not advocating anything more or anything less. I'm suggesting that the people of the city of Tampa have the opportunity to vote on this very important issue. Okay, frankly, I'd like to see us be able to vote on it.
The motion is
let me finish. Let me finish because we're all.
Okay.
Sure,
I have
one
the
person
floor.
to speak at a time.
All right, Mr. Dingfelder, please continue.
Right, thank you. I'm not looking for a fight on this. If I was, I'd say we should do it ourselves. But Ms. Grimes has told us we don't have the ability to delegate that subpoena power. Ms. Grimes has also told us that if we want to put it on the ballot, we can. And that is a policy decision. And putting it on the ballot with the severe limitations that I've talked about, we're not talking about subpoenaing officers. Okay, we are talking about the scenario that one of the witnesses earlier today spoke to, which is if there's other information out there in the community that is important for the board to hear, they could subpoena it. Okay, whether or not it's from witnesses who might have seen the incident happen or what have you. It's all about a search for the truth. And there's nothing wrong with it, but we can let the voters decide if they think it's important. So my motion, if you want me to break it into two, Mr. Chairman, I can break it into two. Maybe that's better. The first part is independent counsel. The second part is limited subpoena power. And they would both go on the next available ballot probably in 2022.
Councilman Citro, did you want to speak, sir?
I just wanted to separate the conversation between legal and between council.
And it's been done.
Now, does legal want to say something?
I want to be clear for the clerk. Does the clerk take that as two separate motions, or do we need to have that done by Councilman Dingfelder?
I think it's probably cleaner for me to make it two separate motions. So my first motion would be that the question of independent counsel go on the ballot, and we'd ask legal staff to bring that back to us in our first meeting in April with language to go on the ballot in 2022. And I don't have the specific language, but I would just say that giving this body the discretion of having independent outside counsel, if that's the board's desire.
Second.
We have a second from Councilman Carlson. Yes, sir, Councilman Citro.
And I heard a couple weeks ago a council member describing the legality of our legal people, whether it be for the city or our own city council attorney. A couple weeks ago saying, why is one doing the job for the other? If we are going to have this charter amendment from this city council, no offense to anybody, shouldn't it be done by our own attorney?
Counsel, quite frankly, I'm happy to participate in the process, but
let me finish one last statement.
Sure.
2 weeks ago, I heard one of our own city council saying, why are we getting city attorneys to do something for us when we have our own council? I'll let you speak. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And this was an issue, by the way. I was assigned by City Council to be a legal advisor along with the city attorney to the Charter Review Commission. But ultimately, when it came to the matter of something that involved something related to the city charter, I defer to the city attorney, and Ms. Grimes can opine if she wishes, but because it's an ordinance that has very strict statutory requirements, also very specific procedural requirements, and also in that it involves the charter of the city, which is something in terms of the legal affairs of the city. I certainly can opine to it, but I certainly did defer at the time to the city attorney the ballot language had to be prepared, it had to be approved by the city attorney, and the legal department, working in the process, was able to complete the procedural steps that got it on the ballot. So in terms of drafting the language, I'm certainly willing to prepare that draft language, but I think maybe Ms. Grimes would like to address her position about it, because if it differs than mine, I'm happy to hear it.
And Mr. Chair, if I may intervene, I need to leave in about 5 minutes. I said that 5 minutes ago, but it's just in the month of February, I don't have anyone able to pick up my son, and just because I want to vote on everything, but just.
Okay. Anybody else? We get to a vote?
I think I would like to offer, I appreciate your remarks, Councilman Citro, but I will be happy to work with Mr. Shelby in drafting the language. Then that way you can feel assured that he's had an opportunity to look at it. But I'm happy to take the lead if that's okay. Either way, if you want to have him do it, that's fine. And I'd be happy to work with him, though.
Very good. Councilman Citro. Yes, Councilman Citro, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Dingfelder. Councilman Dingfelder. Mr. Chair, council members, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Grimes, thank you for letting me express my opinion.
Okay. Councilman Dingfelder, Councilman Carlson.
I just said, I think we have a motion and a second. Let's do it.
All right, Councilman Carlson, yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, since Councilman Vieira is leaving, the most important vote of the day is to vote on the underlying issue to move that forward. So the
Very
quicker
good. We have a motion from Councilman Dink. Yes, Councilman Miranda. Yes, sir. You're muted, sir. You're muted.
We can't hear you.
We can't hear you.
Hear you, Charlie.
Can you state that motion again? I want to make sure I'm voting. I've heard so much chatter, my head is confused.
Thank you, Mr. Miranda. The motion is that we're directing both Ms. Grimes' office and Mr. Shelby to work together to draft language that would give the CRB the discretion to hire independent or to retain independent counsel, and we would put that on as a charter question for the citizens.
Very good. Councilman Dingfelder has a motion. Do we have a second? Second? Second from Vieira?
Oh, no.
No?
Councilman Carlson.
Councilman Carlson with the second. Roll call?
Goods,
Good boy.
Dingfelder,
Yes.
Maniscalco,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Citro,
Yes.
Miranda,
Yes.
Vieira.
Yes.
Motion carried unanimously.
Councilman Dingfelder, you have another motion, the second part?
Right. And the last motion, very similarly, would be to direct the legal department, Ms. Grimes, to work with Mr. Shelby to draft language that would put the limited subpoena power on the next available ballot 2022. And I stated earlier the limitations, the express limitations on the subpoena power. But you know what? I'm going to pull back on that express language. I'm going to say that that's the intent. The intent is not to subpoena officers, and that any subpoena that might issue from that board would be subject to the review of whatever attorney is sitting with that board. But that's the intent. I will give Mr. Shelby and Ms. Grimes the discretion to craft the appropriate language and bring it back to us at the first meeting in April.
Very good. Councilman Dingfelder has a motion. We have a second? Yes, Ms. Grimes?
Wait. Yes, there is absolutely no way all of this can be done and be brought back in April. Absolutely no way.
When is a good time for you?
There's no hurry. Why don't we modify both of those, the independent counsel and then this motion, which is the limited subpoena power. You can bring it back in June.
June 3rd or June 17th?
June.
All right, let's do June 17th. Is that all right?
Okay.
All right, we have a motion from
Mello.
Councilman Dingfelder. Yes?
Same is true for these other changes that you want. I'm not going to be able to bring them back right away. When we were talking about scheduling this for first reading on March 18th, we were talking about in the format that it currently exists. With all these changes that you've provided today, it's going to take some time to go through it.
Let's vote on these motions before Lewis has to leave.
All right, motion from Councilman Dingfelder. Do we have a second? Second?
Where? Who?
Second?
I'll give him a second discussion.
We have a second from Councilman Goods. Any discussion?
I will.
Yes, sir.
I mean,
Turn your microphone on.
I think briefly that we got to be careful that we're not biting off more than we can chew on this board right now by putting forth all these proposals, and I think we come at risk of doing that with this.
Very good.
What are we going forward with on this? I think we need a lot more discussion, et cetera. I think this is, the part where we're walking forward, and I go, wait a second, what's just my thoughts?
Very good. We have a motion from Councilman Dingfelder, second from Councilman Goods. Yes? Yes, sir?
I gave the second, respect to my colleague, but I think that we've made a lot of changes today so far, and we've kicked the football down the field. I think now the receiver's catching it, and it's going to come back. I think some of the other things that we're asking, because the council's legal's getting real overloaded, and it could be frustrating. I know they worked very hard. I think the other charter amendments that we talk about subpoena and things like that, we bring that back a little bit later, let this get instituted, and we bring those things back, and then before the next election or whatever, then we can bring that down to maybe look at putting that on the ballot, Mr. Dingfelder. But we've overloaded them a lot today.
Councilman Vieira needs to leave, and Councilman Dingfelder is going to have to leave at 3:30. Just getting
Am I recognized?
I said Councilman Vieira needs to leave, and Councilman Dingfelder needs to leave at 3:30. Am I correct?
Oh, yes.
Right,
Okay.
and let me just respond to everybody. The only reason I'm suggesting we vote on it now is to try and get to some finality on this. Everybody's getting worn out. I don't think we want this to drag on, all the way into 2021 and then 2022, et cetera, et cetera. This is merely putting it on the ballot. And if we can't trust the citizens to make decisions for us, well, then we're no better than the Supreme Court, which just decided we can't trust the citizens to make decisions for us. But anyway, in all seriousness, this is just to put it on the ballot. And I've given total discretion to Mr. Shelby and Ms. Grimes in terms of what that language would be. But it's not to subpoena cops. It's not to subpoena cops. It's not to subpoena cops. Okay?
Councilman Carlson.
Yeah, with those express limitations, I would vote in favor of it after we get this version approved. And so if it comes to a vote now, I'll vote against it. But if it comes back afterwards, I would likely vote for it.
Very good. We have
All
a
right,
motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll withdraw the motion and bring it up at a later date.
Very good. All right. Any other motions? If not, we go to the.
Mr. Chair, I need to run if I may. I apologize to everybody. This is only for the month of February. I will be making my AFT motion this evening then, but I appreciate everybody.
Yes, sir.
And
Thank
please
you very
excuse
much.
me.
Is there one final motion, Mr. Chair, or not yet?
Are we voting on this now?
We
I
need
withdrew
to,
the motion.
The motion is withdrawn?
There's
but
it's
can
out of
we
it.
need to make a motion on the overall
Yes.
ordinance.
Yes.
Councilman
Yes.
Carlson.
Who
So
wants
we
to
have
do that?
Councilman Carlson. Who wants to make the motion on the
You guys wanna-
this draft here?
I would like to move that that legal work with city council attorney to come up with a revised draft ordinance for first reading. Can we say that, Gina? On what date? June 12th?
No, March.
Well, no, that's a question for the city attorney,
No,
based on what's
no,
been presented to
yeah,
you, council.
She just said we
I
can't do
think,
March.
May.
April's adequate. Come on.
And can I say first reading?
No, it's absolutely not. It is not. I don't think you have any idea of the amount of work involved in drafting it and then debating it with Mr. Shelby and then making sure all the other
So what date?
stakeholders have had an opportunity.
Like
to
Mr.
look
Good
at it.
says, tell us when we can do it.
Got to
When-
be fair to them.
When's the best date? When can we say?
Make it in May. You can do it in May.
May 20th? May 20th?
May 20th, and can we call that first reading or not?
Well, the council, you will see that, I guess, is that okay, Ms. Grimes? Yes? Did you say yes? I'm sorry.
May 20th.
Yes, yes.
City attorney and city council attorney work together to bring the revised ordinance back for first reading on May 20th.
Can't hear you, Mr. Shelby.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry. Your microphone was off.
May 20th.
May 20th?
Yeah, I would like to make a motion that city attorney and city council attorney work together on a revised ordinance to present to city council for first reading on May 20th.
Second.
We have a motion, Councilman Carlson, second Councilman Citro. Roll call vote.
Dingfelder,
Yes.
Maniscalco,
Yes.
Carlson,
Yes.
Citro, Miranda,
Yes.
Vieira,
Yes.
Goods. Motion carried unanimously.
Great.
Any other CRB
That's it, we're done with CRB.
Please, please pardon.
Of course, sir. 5 minutes recess. Thank you.
Council, may I just ask before you break, Council? Mr. Chairman, before you
Yes?
break, just what is your intent for the rest of the day, knowing that you have a 5 o'clock meeting?
I've tried to speed things up, but we have 3 and 4, and we start at 5 o'clock. So I hope we're done no later, 4:15 or so, maybe 4 o'clock. So we will try our best. Remember, I'm the quiet beetle. We are in recess, 5 minutes.
I'll do the morning walk. I'll do the parking.